Today's discussion is going to be on the American Revolution, the defining war that won independence for the United States from Britain. Now, although the war defined American independence, stories from the war have been passed down for generations. They've become merely legends. The truth of the war is more complicated, as is many other things. The American public was not united. The victory was far from certain. In fact, there are many devastating losses on the American side. So the question of what the United States would win its independence, what kind of shape the United States would take, what kind of government would even emerge, are all serious issues that are not immediately apparent. Look at the topics here, beginning with the First Continental Congress, 1774, the Quebec Act, Battle of Lexington and Concord, Second Continental Congress, George Washington, Bunker Hill, after it took place at Breeds Hill, the Olive Branch Petition, the Prohibitory Act, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, Battles of Dorchester Heights, the Declaration of Independence, Battle of Long Island, Battles of Trenton, Princeton, Saratoga, General Horatio Gates, Valley Forge, Battles of Charleston, Kings Mountain, finally Yorktown, and the Treaty of Paris, 1783. Into the late summer and fall of 1774, two issues would become uppermost in the mind of the colonists. First, the Intolerable Acts. The acts were punishing Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. The ports were shut down. People were in dire straits. The new governor, the military governor, General Thomas Gage, had shut down the Massachusetts legislature. Most of its leaders at this point were in hiding. Essentially, the king had declared Massachusetts to be in rebellion, and all the people would pay for the Boston Tea Party. Second issue was the Quebec Act. Now, Quebec had been won by Britain from the French during the French and Indian War. So that area of eastern Canada, along the St. Lawrence River. And with this act, Parliament had established a government for Quebec under the British Crown. Now you'd think ordinarily that they'd be trying to create an ideal form of government, or one at least recognized, more familiar to British subjects, but instead what the British did was create a government in the French model that is autocratic, with few of the liberties or the representation that English citizens had enjoyed. The Quebec Act created was a government that's appointed directly by the king and answered only to the king. No representative legislature. Privileged position for the Roman Catholic Church. That's most of the French subjects there were Roman Catholic, and made sense to them, but not to the Protestant English colonists further south. There were some Roman Catholics in the colonies, but very few. To make matters even worse, this government for Quebec extended far beyond its traditional boundaries, far south of the St. Lawrence River, to the banks of the Ohio River. Territories claimed by the colonies, particularly Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, especially Virginia, were now under the control of Quebec. Now, these claims spent a lot of money in these colonies. Remember that Virginia expended so much trying to colonize and expand settlements into Ohio. This is also including areas of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, all along the Great Lakes areas. The colonies were incensed. The Proclamation Law in 1763 had attempted to deny them access to the areas. Now it's being moved back under French control, which colonists felt like they had fought for these territories and deserved to become a part of them under the traditional rights and privileges they had as English citizens. The Virginia legislature, the House of Burgesses, had protested the closure of the Massachusetts legislature and the Intolerable Acts, in response to which the Royal Governor of Virginia shuttered the House of Burgesses. So the members of the House of Burgesses, particularly those critics of Britain, decided weren't simply just going to sit around. They decided to continue their business. Something about a local tavern got together, decided that the colony should all get together and meet and discuss their common problems together, particularly the problems of Massachusetts, but also the problems that were increasingly faced by all of them. And this became the First Continental Congress. In this case, Congress simply meaning meetings, not an official government body or anything like that yet. They meet in Philadelphia starting in September 1774. Peyton Randolph of Virginia was elected as president of the convention. Now, Randolph was the leader of it. But there were several factions involved. You have those such as Samuel Adams and Paul Revere pushing for independence. And you have moderates like George Washington. Now, Washington had been a moderate. Washington had been a moderate. He believed that in the boycotts against Britain, but he's taking kind of wait-and-see attitudes for a lot of others. Lawyers like John Dickinson of Philadelphia was a moderate. He's hoping for some reconciliation with Britain. Held that out well into 1776. Dickinson had written several tracts critical of the British, became very popular, called Letters from a Farmer of Pennsylvania. James Otis was another. He was a lawyer, actually took on the British in several of these cases involving the British assistance and others. Tried to have them undone by not the courts, but was unable to win the cases. The First Continental Congress, only 9 of the colonies responded. A lot of the delegates elected extra legally, that is, not the official sanction of the government. So what they decided to do was pass a whole series of resolutions, including petition to the king asking for restraint and asking for relief from the Intolerable Acts, petition to Parliament asking them to rescind the Intolerable Acts. But there were several other measures, such as this one pushed by Paul Revere, the Suffolk Resolves. Revere was a French immigrant, a Huguenot, the Protestant escaping the tyranny of the French government, who was persecuting Protestants. Now, Revere, for his Suffolk Resolves, this is a resolution of support by all the colonies for Massachusetts and urging them to start arming for defense, recognizing the war may be soon coming and people of Massachusetts to prepare themselves for it. Collections began to be organized for relief of the people of Massachusetts. Essentially, their economy is being held hostage by the British at this point. In addition, a new series of boycotts are going to be organized against the British. To be organized by what we call the Continental Association. As representatives of the Continental Association, be organized in communities across the colonies, and they have organized boycotts of all British goods. All, not just tea, not just one's tax on them, all British goods. In addition, they would be reminding the colonists why they were boycotting these goods. Let's be beginning the meeting. Boycotts of all British goods. Furthermore, by June of 1775, if the British had not met their demands, the colonists promised what they called non-exportation. It is not only would the colonists not buy from the British, they wouldn't sell to the British either. It's a critical part of the English economy they're depending on. So the Continental Congress adjourns. Petitions received by England, ignored. At this point, Prime Minister Lord North and King George III are convinced all of New England is a state of rebellion. But they're convinced the heart of the rebellion is in New England itself. So the situation continues through the winter. The boycott growing. And finally, the king and his government decide that they're going to suppress this growing rebellion, as they call it, in Massachusetts and New England. They order the Massachusetts governor, General Thomas Gage, to suppress it by all means necessary. So what Gage decides to do is to first seize the Colonial Supply Depot. It was in Concord, about 20 miles from Boston. And it was a supply depot held by the Minutemen. Now, the Minutemen were the simple militias organized on a local basis by the British. So these are British troops, essentially as volunteers, English subjects. Like I said, basically simple farm boys going out and practicing drills and target practice with their muskets. They're called the Minutemen because they're supposed to be assembled on the town square on a minute's notice. Now, the night of April 18, 1775, the British gathered 700 troops in Boston and headed to the ammunition depot of Concord. The colonial leaders had become aware of the plan and remained determined to hold their ammunition from falling into the British. The Committee of Public Safety had emerged. This is organized by the exiled leaders of the Massachusetts legislature, those critics of Britain. They couldn't meet safely because large groups were broken up by the British by law. They could only meet in large groups with permission of the British government. Certainly having a meeting to discuss what to do about the British marching to Concord was not going to be approved. Well, the Committee on Public Safety had nurtured these growing protest British actions. And so the committee decided to send Paul Revere and his associate, William Dawes, out to spread the word. This is the famous Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Well, Revere rode out, reached Lexington at midnight on April 19th, and alerted 2 men were held out there, particularly John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Hancock was a merchant, very popular merchant in the Boston area. He owned several ships and was subject to quite a bit of harassment by the British, particularly because they tried to have him arrested one day in 1772 when Hancock boarded his ship without paying the taxes and cargo first, which is a technical violation of law, but he always liked reviewing everything beforehand and paying the British on board before he set out, but he always paid. Because of this violation, they tried to make an example of Hancock and had him arrested. near riot of his crew and the crews of other ships watching this from shore. Only at that point did they stop the British. So after that, Hancock was never a fan of the British. Well, Hancock and Samuel Adams are hiding out in Lexington. This is right on the way, the main road leading to Concord. They're sending the report. They spread out, Hancock and Adams spread out even further. At this point, Revere and Dawes are joined by Dr. Samuel Prescott on the ride out to Concord. But along the way, the three are apprehended by British patrol. Prescott managed to ride through and warn the residents of Concord was happening. Revere and Dawes were held for a time, but eventually released the next morning. So the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere, only Prescott got through. But it was what the colonists needed. By mid-morning, most of the ammunition had been destroyed. Either been moved to safety or destroyed. Well, at dawn, the British had reached Lexington, started marching for daylight. They found 70 Minutemen lined up to meet them in Lexington on Town Square, led by Captain John Parker. Parker had no intention of fighting, and simply had his men lined up there at attention as a show of protest. Their guns were not pointed at them, and Parker ordered his men to back away and let the British through. You have to remember, the militias are still loyal to the crown. These are fellow English subjects in arms. So these are their own men. Well, here at Lexington, the Redcoats see the Minutemen, but do see them backing away. The path is clear for the Redcoats, but the Redcoats order their men to fire into this crowd of Minutemen, fire on their own troops, charge them with bayonets, with long knives fixed to the end of their rifles, and the end of the shooting, 8 Minutemen were dead, 10 more were wounded. British regrouped and marched on to Concord. It's technically considered to be the first battle of the American Revolution, but it's a loss. At mid-morning, most of the munitions were evacuated by the time the British had arrived. The British quickly seized control of the depot and destroyed what was left. But by this time, you had the Concord Minutemen and Minutemen from surrounding cities, plus the civilians who had heard what happened at Lexington, started gathering and opened fire on the British. The British are forced to withdraw. Their mission had been accomplished. What they have to do, though, is they have to march all this distance, all the way back through those crowds of people that heard what the British had done at Lexington, Concord. They have to run a gauntlet. All along the way, on that tired afternoon back, they're being shot at from behind fences, behind trees, behind barns. They don't know where they're being shot from, having rocks thrown at them. They stop, fire periodically, blindly, don't know who they're shooting at. But they're being picked off a few at a time. By the time the British reached Boston, the original 700 troops, they'd suffered 250 casualties. There were only 93 American casualties. So for the British and the Americans, it was clear. The war is down here. These two battles together on April 19, 1775 came to be called the Shot Heard Around the World. But more fighting would be coming. Now, the American Revolution was fought by comparatively small armies in small areas, especially savage in many areas of conflict. Americans engaged in periodically in guerrilla tactics. Now, guerrilla fighting, it doesn't mean overgrown primate. Guerrilla comes from the French word guerre, which means war. Essentially, it's hit and run tactics. It's different from the British column formation fighting that's been used traditionally in Europe. But the Americans do use these tactics in larger battles, but some of these smaller, more localized battles, a lot of it is hit and run tactics, guerrilla tactics. British response is harsh against civilians. But understand, there are some misnomers about this. The old movie The Patriot was largely historically inaccurate. The British would not lock civilians in a church and burn it down. They would not do that. But they would fire indiscriminately on civilians. In the early days of the war, the question of independence remained. Many were still loyal to the king. The unity of the colonies was in question, and after independence fighting, loyalist Americans continued. Finances of the Americans were strained by the war effort, and the question of what kind of America would emerge from the fight had remained. But America still faced the question of just what it fought for and how it could defeat the largest military force on earth, the British. Now, while opinion polls didn't exist in this time period, it's hard to know how many Americans really supported the fight. Essentially, you have three major groups. Those favoring independence, the Patriots, the Minutemen, the Continental Forces, and the like. Then you have that kind of neutral forces, those who just kind of want to be left alone, want to stay out of the war and just mind their own business. Then you have the Loyalists, also called the Tories. Tory in the British slang means conservative. But the Loyalists, they fought the British. They're fighting for the crown of the king that they've been raised to believe in. Essentially fighting on the theory, my country, right or wrong. In many areas, fighting between the Patriots and Loyalists were so intense that it was almost a civil war in many areas. In fact, in many ways, this could be described as a civil war. Well, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia on May 10, 1775. The Second Continental Congress would never really adjourn. Once the fighting started, it started simply assuming the position of the national government, although none officially existed yet. At this point, you have Boston under siege by the British, occupied by the British. It's under siege by the Massachusetts militias surrounding the city and taking pot shots at the redcoats whenever they could. Warfare spreading throughout the colonies. Congress had no legal authority and no means which to conduct a war, began assuming the role of the national government, began directing efforts towards the British. Eventually resort to printing paper money to help finance the war, though temporarily paying the bills led to massive inflation and heavy war debt. Georgia would send no delegates in the following fall, so it's only 12 of 13 colonies mission. Among the delegates did include Ben Franklin. Franklin had made a tidy little fortune selling a best-selling almanac, Portrait's Almanac, but also was a great scientist in his own right. He really was one of the world's foremost experts on electricity at the time. Actually, he had the famous experiment where he flew a kite in a thunderstorm with a key attached to it, based on his theory that lightning was electricity. Basically, had this key attached to this kite. The string was down in this little jar where he's going to store the lightning, the electricity, try to study it, basically kind of a crude battery or capacitor, it worked. Unfortunately, there are other men that tried that and were electrocuted. But Franklin was able to prove that lightning was indeed electricity. He experimented back and forth with the electricity, but also mentioned the lightning rod was extremely effective, essentially directing lightning away from tall buildings towards this lightning rod. Essentially saved many lives and saved many buildings from catching fire and being destroyed by lightning strikes. Not something much of a common problem anymore because of Franklin's invention. Franklin would, a wise sage, widely respected in the colonies and the Congress, spent a lot of the American Revolution as a diplomat to France. Another one was George Washington. He won a lot of fame from the French and Indian War. He was a Virginia planter. When he married Martha Custis, the widow, he became the richest man in Virginia. Well, Washington, from his fame in the French and Indian War, decided that he would be best suited to lead the Continental Army, which the Continental Congress was organizing. Now, you have the militia units fighting locally, but the Continental Army is basically supposed to be the main force against the British. Washington is commissioned as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army on June 15th. The army is established. Washington accepted on one condition, that he receive no pay. Washington believed it was a fight for his rights and his liberties for his fellow citizens, and he should not profit from it. They didn't make any money off this war. In fact, there are many instances which he paid for supplies for his troops out of his own pocket. Well, Washington had been a supporter of the boycotts and protests against the British. He was somewhat a moderate, one-way firebrand like Patrick Henry in Virginia, said, "Give me liberty, give me death," in a dramatic speech against the British, or Samuel Adams. Washington believed that America's secret resource was he called the unconquerable resolution of our citizens. Unconquerable resolution of our citizens. But Britain, though, by comparison, had almost unlimited resources in a worldwide empire to draw them from. Well, elsewhere, May 10th, Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys of Vermont a colorful group of end of the war. Did a lot of actions on the British in New York and the Vermont area. Well, he was with Allen was with Benedict Arnold of Connecticut. He was actually a very skilled and trusted general on the American side for most of the war until he betrayed the Americans. They took Fort Ticonderoga in New York from the British. May 10th. And Crown Point, New York, on 2 days later on May 12th. The Americans starting to take some territory from the British. But the British and both their forces occupied Boston, which is a particular problem. Well, the first major battle in the American Revolution is going to be Bunker Hill. It's on June 17th, 1775. Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire militiamen joined the Massachusetts militiamen surrounding Boston. Americans had fortified the nearby high ground. They originally selected Bunker Hill as a site in which they would make their stand. Basically, these high ground and hills kind of surrounding the city. But at the last minute, they decided to switch to Breeds Hill, which is a little bit closer to the city. This is where the actual battle actually took place. So, while it's typically called Bunker Hill, it actually took place at Breeds Hill. British commanded by three generals, Sir William Howe, Henry Clinton, and John Burgoyne. They ordered their 2,200 redcoats to march into colonial positions, marching in column. Civilians watching the whole thing from rooftops. Americans at the top of Breeds Hill were behind earthworks, fences, and walls ordered Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Famous order, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. There's a reason for that. You see, the rifles they had at the time were of a limited range. They could only fire accurately about 20 or 30 paces. And at that point, 60, 70, 80 feet, it's only at that point you can really start distinguishing the black part of the eye from the iris. To understand even worse, these are single shot muskets being used by both sides. So essentially you have to, after you line up, you take your shot, but only about half of them will. In that case, the other half are going to march forward in front of you while you have to duck down and reload. That's why you have to pack it. What you have with you is your pouring your gunpowder, your buckshot. You have to pack it in, take a step forward in front of the other guys, and then fire it in. You have to do that over and over and over again. So you're firing slowly, reloading, and advancing. But you're within 100 feet of each other when this only starts. So it's only when you start getting closer and closer, you're only able to fire on each other, but recognizing you advance, you're only going to have a few shots you're going to be able to take. So it's going to come a point where that bayonet comes in, that big knife, where it comes, you're right in the middle of everything, you have to start fighting hand to hand. Fire and stab. Well, the British marched up Breed's Hill twice, each time repelled by heavy American gunfire. Basically, they're marching uphill into a fortified position. It's not going to work very well. But on the third time up, the Americans ran out of ammunition, forced to throw stones. This organized mass ran. The British again regrouped, announced to the Americans of the bayonet charge. But at the end of the day, even though they had repelled the Americans from the position, the British lost 1,054 men, more than 1,000 dead and wounded out of the original 2,200, nearly 50% casualty rate. The Americans lost 400. General Clinton wrote his peers that, quote, "This was a dear-bought victory. Another such would have ruined us." The British would be very cautious in future encounters, and the Continental Congress would start recommending all able-bodied men start enlisting their local militias. Well, the stalemate would last through the winter until Washington arrived and took command. Battle of Dorchester Heights in March 1776 was able to take the high ground, which brought all Boston under the direct threat of a Continental cannon fire. The British seeing the situation evacuate Boston, taking the troops and frightening loyalists with them. Well, in the meantime, July 1775, Benedict Arnold led the assault on Quebec, trying to recreate what General James Wolfe had done during the siege of Quebec during the French and Indian War. It was authorized by the Continental Congress in hopes of inspiring support for Canada. Americans laid siege to the city for months, but were repelled by December 1775. The Canadians, by and large, were never interested in the American fight for independence and stayed out of it. Finally, July 1775, it all break. Fighting has been going on for months to this point. In this petition, colonists professed loyalty to George III and begged for restraint. John Dickinson and other moderators in Congress are hoping for conciliation with Britain, but others, such as John and Samuel Adams and Richard Henry Lee, Light Horse Harry Lee, Virginia, were arguing very strongly for independence at this point. The Second Continental Congress also issued a statement called the Declaration of Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms.
In this, John Dickinson wrote the history of the American grievances of England, condemning British actions at Lexington, and declared they had only two alternatives left to the Americans. He said, quote, "Unconditional submission to the tyranny of irritated ministers or resistance by force." Unconditional submission to the tyranny of irritated ministers or submission or resistance by force. Now, at this point, most Americans believe they're fighting to redress a grievances against the British Empire, not independence. But the British are starting to pull out all the stops to hold the colonies by force. They began recruiting Native Americans, that is, once part even offered bounties for colonial scalps. That is, using the same pattern the French did, trying to incite the tribes to attack the colonial frontier settlements. They recruited slaves in the South. Whereas they had a lot of support initially from the planters because of they're doing so much business between Britain and the planters. By recruiting slaves, they ended up alienating a lot of planters in the South. They're promising the slaves and their families freedom if they fought with the British. So the British did keep their promise. These slaves were freed after the war, and they did take them with them after the war. But in the meantime, whilst meant short British manpower is alienating critical supporters in the South. The British also hired mercenaries, the Hessians, a group of German mercenaries from the German province of Hesse. Should be very fierce fighters, some of the best available. But George III, though, was outraged by the increasing problems in the colonies, refused to look at the Olive Branch petition, and declared all colonies to be in rebellion by this point. Not just simply Massachusetts or New England, all of them. So Parliament passed the Prohibitory Act in 1775. Essentially, it was a declaration of war on the colonies, a declaration of war on their own people. It closed all American ports through a naval blockade, offered a pardon only to repentant rebels. After this, Americans concluded that independence was the only option they had left. Meantime, the Loyalists were attempting to organize. Virginia's Royal Governor Dunmore, raising a Loyalist force, included slaves to prove the promise of freedom, but met with defeat at the hands of the Patriots in December 1775 in Virginia. In North Carolina, the Loyalist Highland Scots moving in from the Appalachians, hoping to join British forces in Delaware, lost a Patriot force at the Battle of Morris Creek Bridge. So you had a civil war, essentially, in America. Neighbor fighting neighbor, some to defend the king and Parliament they'd always raised believe in, and others for the freedom they believed the king and Parliament were depriving. Well, in June of 1776, interesting Battle of Charleston. At this point, the British are attempting to take Charleston by sea. The Americans erected a fort on Sullivan's Island, constructed of native palmetto wood. The fort was named after the commanding officer, Colonel William Moultrie. The commander used to be that. Essentially, it's a fortress on an island protecting the interests of the port of Charleston. As the British ships arrive in summer 1776, they see this fort and start opening fire on it, but it's made out of palmetto wood. See, palmetto wood is comparatively kind of soft and spongy wood compared to something like oak or hickory. So instead of the artillery shattering the wood on impact, palmetto wood kind of absorbs the cannon fire. So the fort takes very little damage. The British get closer and closer, but finally they're in range of all the American cannons. Once that happens, the Americans open up with everything they've got, crippling the British fleet, forcing them to turn back. So because of the palmetto tree, Moultrie's clever tactics, Charleston is saved from the British, at least for a time. Since that time, the flag of the state of South Carolina has had the palmetto tree on it in honor of this victory at Fort Moultrie in 1776. If you ever see the South Carolina flag or South Carolina license plate, it's a tree on it. It's why the palmetto tree is there. Thomas Paine Paine had met Ben Franklin while he's still basically a lobbyist for the colonies. He was impressed by Paine. Paine was a corset maker, a very passionate man, a good writer. And Franklin convinced him to go to America. Paine does so, and once the revolution starts erupting, Paine issues a number of pamphlets, most notably Common Sense, January 1776. It's published anonymously in Philadelphia, 150,000 copies printed in 3 months. An enormous number for the time, especially when you got 3 million colonists altogether. It's tempting to turn the arguments away from parliamentary measures to the English Constitution itself, attacking the monarchy, which was, in the arguments, was the last remnant of American loyalty, refocusing the hostility against Parliament and against the king directly. Clever, dramatic styles. He convinced many Americans against supporting for independence, calling on their officials to start declaring independence and making governments independent of England. During the later part of the war, he wrote The Crisis, essays attempting to boost the colonial morale in the darker days of the war. He opened these essays often with the line, "These are the times of the trodden men's souls," recognizing the difficult situation they're in, but encouraging them, rallying them, often taunting British leaders and generals in the process. In his later career, though, Paine was kind of bored and returned to England in 1789, wrote a defense of the French Revolution called The Rights of Man. Rights of Man is a classic treatise on his defense of liberty, democracy, and equality, but 1795, because he's supporting the French while the British were at war with them, he's indicted for seditious libel and fled to France. He's actually briefly a member of the French Parliament, so they thought of government with their rulers. But he's an atheist and returned to America in 1802, wrote a number of unpopular tracts on religion, which was the denunciation of religion was fairly unpopular, and of dying isolated and in debt and alcoholic in 1809. Paine, the man who once inspired millions, had a funeral attended by only 6 people. Now, in response to the Prohibitory Act, the Continental Congress closed American ports to British ships, welcoming all other nations. Again, recommending colonies making governments independent of Britain, but many are already doing so, directing the delegates to Philadelphia declare independence from Britain directly. It's one united voice of the colonies. But at this point, though, the colonies aren't even really sure what to call themselves. Like I said, they don't have, the flag is simply a variation on the British flag. The first flag was called the Grand Union flag, the Continental Colors. First flown in 1775. Essentially, it was what you have in one corner is the British Union Jack. The white and blue British flag. And these red and white stripes. So kind of a variation on the British flag. That was flown from about until about 1777. It actually was the flag when the Americans were declaring independence. Betsy Ross is generally credited as the first, credited as the designer of the American flag, classic stars and stripes design. Yeah, this blue field in the corner. Red and white, 13 red and white stripes, and the 13 stars in the circular pattern, that way to represent the new constellation, the heavens that America represented, the new constellation. The white stripes are purity, the red stripes are the blood that was spilled in defense of the nation. Again, design in general, the design approved by Congress on June 14, 1777, Flag Day. But whether Ross herself was directly responsible for it is still a matter of some question, but this nevertheless became the official flag. The name of the United States originally, they weren't exactly sure. Initially, for a time, they referred to themselves generally as the United Colonies. After the Declaration of Independence was signed, this generally was this was what the reference was to, the United Colonies. It's not until October 9th, 1776, that the official name for the new nation was decided on, not the United Colonies, but the United States of America. So as you can see, it's a time when everything was still a matter of uncertainty. But in the summer of 1776, June 7th, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia made a motion for the colonies to declare independence. The motion was on the table. And while by this point it's essentially a foregone conclusion of how they're going to vote, so simply a vote up or down wasn't enough. They needed to make a statement to the world. Why are they doing this? Why are they declaring independence? So Congress, in classic tradition, decided to convene a committee. This committee would get together and write a declaration, a statement to the world, and particularly to the British government, why they're declaring independence. The committee is led by Thomas Jefferson, a young delegate from Virginia. Jefferson was 33, Virginia planter, brilliant man, scientist, writer, philosopher, so many things, inventor. Well, Jefferson led this committee. It included Ben Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. As all men of a great esteem and respect in the colonies, they decided Jefferson was the expert who could write it. Except like any group project, one person was doing most of the work. Well, Jefferson agonizes for weeks over everything, and eventually presents it. Franklin makes a few changes, particularly the idea Jefferson wrote life, liberty, and property. Franklin changed to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Congress reworked a bit afterward, rewording, adding some phrases, striking out others. But essentially, it's written in two parts. The first is a listening discussion of the responsibilities of governments. That is, what is good government? That is, what is... and in this... Jefferson echoed John Locke's words very carefully. His theories declare what is just in a government. And the second part was the grievances, how Britain had failed in its responsibilities to the people. 27 listed, particularly referring directly to King George III. And it's listed here in the back of the book. Beginning, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and assume the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinion of mankind requires they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Things on a bit further here. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, such is now the necessity of constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, while having a direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And they again of the grievances at that point. He has refused his assent to laws, most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He in this case, George III. Referring to among other things, when New York refused to go along with the Quartering Act. New York refused to agree to allow its laws to be passed. Continuing on further here. He dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people, including the dissolution of the Massachusetts legislature and the Virginia House of Burgesses, among others. He has erected a multitude into offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substances, the customs inspectors and so forth. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power, quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, that is, the Prohibitory Act, imposing taxes on us without our consent, depriving us of many cases and benefits of trial by jury, the vice admiralty courts, so on and so forth. For abolishing the free system of the English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, enlarging its boundaries as Ritter once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, the Quebec Act. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection, waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun. The circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely parallel the most barbarous ages, totally unworthy head of a civilized nation. So forth. Here at the bottom. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, and the General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world about the rectitude of our intentions to a name and authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are in a right to be free independent states. They are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, all political connection with them and the state of Great Britain. It is not to be totally dissolved. As free independent states, they have the power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all the other acts and things which independent states may have right to do. Support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we pledge to give our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. John Hancock signed it, largest of it, largest signature there. Ben Franklin noted while signing it, said, "We must all hang together, we shall all hang separately." They all recognized that if they should lose, this was an act of treason, and they would all be hanged for it. Yes, they, many their lives, fortune, sacred honor, knowing that some of them may lose everything, some of them may lose their lives by the time the war is over. Now, the most notable mission from the Declaration of Independence was the slavery clause. Jefferson had originally written, he has waged cruel war against human nature itself, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain his execrable commerce. And this assemblage of horrors may have no fact of distinguished die, is not exciting those very people to rise in arms among us, to purchase that liberty which he's deprived them by murdering the people on whom he's also intruded them. It was to strike down or gain support of the southern states. But Jefferson in his writing always showed agonizing moral conflict over slavery. On July 2nd, the Continental Congress approved the resolution declaring independence, the day which John Adams wrote to his wife will be the most memorable epoch in American history, believing that the Americans would celebrate that day as a great national holiday for that day forward, that is July 2nd. Now, July 2nd is the day in which independence was approved. The Declaration itself was not approved until July 4th, the day we actually celebrate. Some of the men signed it on that day, but others signed on other days afterward. But the Declaration itself approved and signed beginning on July 4th. Washington read the Declaration as the troops gathering at Long Island, New York. British critics of the Revolution ridiculed the American intention of all men created equal, a slave-holding society. But Jefferson is trying to do here, though, do something more than this. He's trying to create the idea that this would be a land where men can be more than what they're born into. And each day, get out of bed, try to be a better man than you were the day before. It's freedom to try to be more than what you are, to grow as a person, to make your life what you want it to be. Interesting question here. What did they think the war was being fought for? In 1842, Levi Preston told a one-time Massachusetts Minuteman and one of the surviving veterans of the war, told his story and what the war was about. And I asked him, what are the causes of it? Was it about the tea? Preston said, no, never drank it. Stamp tax? I never paid a penny of it. Preston said, quote, we had always governed ourselves and always meant to. They didn't mean we should. They didn't mean we should. It was fighting for the right to determine the course of their own lives. Now the British, like we said, are pulling out all the stops. July 2nd, same day Continental Congress passed the Independence Resolution, British landed at undefended Long Island in New York. General William Howe was command of a force of 32,000 troops. That's the largest single force mustered by the British in the 18th century. It was the largest armies they sent overseas that entire century, all to retake America. His brother, Admiral Richard Howe, is leading a naval armada to support the ground forces. Remember, armies, they're typically small this time. Large armies like the men where they come along to the point and organize the French armies during the nationalist phase of the French Revolution. This will be some years later. At this point, Washington transferred a large portion of his men, about 19,000, to Long Island to meet. Congress wanted New York held. Largest city in the colonies, becoming the largest city in the colonies, extremely important port. What England's hoping to do, though, is take New York, move up Hudson Valley, and sever New England from the rest of the colonies. There's a divide and conquer strategy. Well, the battle begins July 1776, the Battle of Long Island. British, their professional soldiers, Hessian mercenaries, forced the outmanned and outgunned Americans off of Long Island. The Americans barely escaped Manhattan at this point, Howe almost catching the American army. Washington lost successive battles at Harlem Heights and White Plains. Washington's still retreated upward, away from New York, away from Long Island. Retreated across New York and eventually pushed back into New Jersey. Throughout the remainder of the summer and fall, Washington loses one battle after another, steadily retreating until finally winter approached. They're pushed across the Delaware River out of New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. Well, the British at this point decided to stop for the winter. Typically don't fight in the winter time. At this point, they left an outpost Hessian mercenaries at Trenton, try to keep an eye on the Americans, see what they're doing, but Washington realized what was happening. These troops had signed up for a year and all the enlistments coming due. A lot of them are going to fight another year like they just fought. So Washington decided they needed a quick victory to send morale back up to an acceptable level and show America and the world, especially America, that the fight wasn't over. So on Christmas night, 1776, Washington decided to strike back. In a daring move, Washington and his men quietly slipped across the Delaware River back in New Jersey, carefully going back across by canoe. Washington carefully organized his men on the New Jersey side and surprised the Hessians, who were still recovering from the holiday festivities. The Battle of Trenton.
early morning hours, December 26, 1776. Now, these are mostly New Englanders, a lot of them Puritans. Christmas is not widely celebrated at this point in the Americas. Like I said, in fact, the Puritans believed that all the Christmas festivities, parties, drinking, carousing was kind of vulgar, but that's why they're kind of put off by it. But the Germans, they like drinking, they like having a good time. The Hessians are Germans. So basically, Washington's troops march up to the Hessian outpost at Trenton, December 26th, surprising the Hessians, a lot of whom were probably a little bit hungover. And before they realize it, the Americans have taken the outpost and forced the Hessians to surrender. Washington occupied Trenton and moved on to Princeton, nearby. A few days later, January the 3rd, 1777, Washington drove the British from their positions at the Colleton City with some help from the students. In 2 successive battles, Americans had turned the tide of the war, showing they were not out of it, they're still fighting. These 2 battles today are often called the 7 Days Wonder, so showing that America wasn't done yet. The 7 Days Wonder lifted American morale. The Americans moved to winter headquarters in Morristown, New Jersey, in some ways north of there. Now, Washington is not so remarkable for his victories over the British. He actually won very few battles. What he did was he kept a poorly equipped, poorly trained army of regular men in the field against highly skilled professional army for 6 years. He kept an army coming after him year after year after year, challenging them, engaging the British, wearing them down. The leadership kept the American Revolution alive in its most desperate hours. Back in the 1970s, historians began comparing the American experience in Vietnam with the British experience in the United States. Americans and the Viet Cong both used guerrilla tactics. They're tending to force views that weren't very popular in a foreign land. Both are facing guerrilla tactics when attempting to use conventional tactics. They're winning battles, but their enemies kept coming at them in both cases. The Americans in the Vietnam, like the British during the American Revolution, they controlled the cities, but not the countryside. It's a strange land they weren't really appreciated. In fact, the Vietnamese and the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence, they often cited the American founding fathers in defense of their causes. Now, New York is going to be held by the British throughout the entire war. It's a particular problem for the Americans, but they're not going to be able to apply this logic from it. But the British kept coming at it. Howe kept it in the spring, summer, kept after Washington. This time threatened now Philadelphia. Philadelphia, that's acting as the national capital. Philadelphia managed, Congress wanted it held at all costs, but in a series of battles in and around Philadelphia, Washington loses control of the city. But while that would have been a disaster by itself and was bad enough in a very disastrous year, it's saved by what was happening actually in upstate New York. August 6, 1777, Battle of Oriskany, New York. General John Burgoyne was attempting to move south from Canada and trying to go down the Hudson River Valley to link up with Howe's forces coming north from New York City, or try their effort to try to separate New England from the rest of the colonies, the divide and conquer. But bad communication, bad planning, Howe's moving further south into New Jersey and Pennsylvania, but Burgoyne moving south from Canada, expecting reinforcements, but his own pride and arrogance expects won't need it at all. And realizes they weren't coming. Well, the Battle of Oriskany, New York, a militia
Continental Militia repelled an ambush for a combined Tory Native American force. Native American forces leave the Mohawk Valley as Continental reinforcements poured in. A few days later, Bennington, on 1777. British foraging party is defeated at this point. Burgoyne is forced to pull back out of Vermont, out of the Lake Champlain area, into Saratoga. Here he's meeting, local militias and Continental forces under the command of General Horatio Gates. Remember, the Continental Army is not just one large army. It's moving just being in one place at a time. It's separating the subunits and divisions and so forth. Gates is commanding one of them, but he's answering to Washington. Washington had his highest confidence in Gates. At Saratoga, the Americans are using large numbers of something fairly new, something called the rifle barrel. Essentially, there are grooves in the barrel to make the bullets spin out faster, truer, and straighter, giving them a greater range, which was a tremendous improvement over the muskets they're using at Bunker Hill and so forth. It's not going to be always going to be used, but it's used enough, and particularly enough at this point, that it helped make a difference. At Saratoga, Gates forces Burgoyne and his 5,700 troops to surrender. The largest British loss in the war. These men are being turned in Virginia as prisoners of war. POW camps at this point are simply just holding areas while the troops are being exchanged to that negotiated troop exchange between the two sides. Well, Saratoga proves to be the first major victory to the Americans. They forced the entire British army to surrender. When news reached France by December, the battle took place on October 17th, 1777. By the time news reached France by December, the French celebrated the American victory as if one of their own armies had won. Glad to see the British losing the war. And at this point, the French were more willing to discuss an alliance. Since 1775, the French had agents in Philadelphia encouraging American resistance and offering French aid as early as November 1775. Americans set up a secret committee of correspondence to the French, tried to negotiate with their diplomats. And by 1776, began sending agents to France to buy munitions, and Benjamin Franklin was named as ambassador. In fact, interestingly enough, most of the gunpowder used by the Continental Army in the first 2 years of the war was supplied by the French. By May, the Crown was directly offering aid to the Americans, though through third-party agents. But Ben Franklin, in the meantime, as ambassador, was quietly charming the French public. Not talking to any group who was willing to discuss them and discuss the American situation, and also willing to discuss the prospect of a French alliance with the United States. France is a big, powerful nation. The U.S. needs help. If the U.S. had won the war without the French, who knows? Maybe. But it may have been a very different shape of the United States that emerged. And the Americans want this help. They need this help. Franklin charmed the philosophers, the scholars, the diplomats, their wives. Actually, he's kind of a ladies' man, but Franklin also talked to various governmental agents here and there when he could. But now that Saratoga, this victory in October, changes everything. The British aren't undefeatable. Americans can beat the British. The French wouldn't be, if they did ally the United States, they wouldn't be carrying the whole load. The French could depend on the United States as a willing ally. Somebody who could basically, they wouldn't be having to back a bad horse. So on February 6, 1778, French signed two treaties. One, a treaty of amity and commerce. It is a general this treaty recognized the United States as an independent nation. In fact, France was the first nation to recognize American independence. It offered important trade concessions to the United States. And second, a treaty of alliance, which the United States was especially interested in. They'd offer each other's aid in time of war. Since the United States are allies at war, France was going to declare war on Britain. As a result, by June 1778, British were firing on French ships in their war with France. So already we have the U.S. and Great Britain fighting each other. France fought in 1778, but France has allies. In 1779, they convinced Spain to come in. On the French promise of regaining lost territory, Spain declares war on England in 1779. In fact, Bernardo de Galvez, the royal governor of New Spain, sent his ships out against the British in the Caribbean and to keep the British off balance, which helped keep these British ships away from harassing the American coast. Proved to be very, very important. In 1780, because Holland was illegally trading with the United States, that is, against British wishes, Britain declared war on Holland. So by 1780, you have 5 countries fighting over American independence: America, Britain, France, Spain, and Holland. Also, in many ways, almost another world war. By 1778, Lord North, the Prime Minister, realized the war couldn't be won in America and offered his resignation to the King. The King refused and pressed him to continue the war. So on March 16, 1778, he offered the Americans all conditions they demanded for the war. Repealed the Townshend Acts, all remaining acts, the Massachusetts Government Act, and the Government Act and the Prohibitory Act. Congress refused to negotiate until Britain either recognized American independence or withdrew all troops from the Americans. So essentially, if they withdrew their troops, they'd lose all their leverage. But if the British recognized them, they'd be one fighting anyway. In the meantime, the British withdrew from Philadelphia, further weakening the British bargaining position. So a new diplomatic front is opening up. The British recognize the war can't be won, but they're going to try to cut their losses. In the meantime, you have another battle the Americans fighting: Winter Valley Forge. This is in Pennsylvania. Then another difficult, it's in the winter of 1777-78. Result of another long, difficult year of fighting with the British. Here, the Americans endured harsh conditions. It became symbolic of the sacrifices and the difficulties Americans are facing throughout the war. Not necessarily a colder winter than any other, but Americans are facing desertions. A lot of enlistment terms are expiring, so a lot of these troops are just up and leaving. They're short of supplies, short of food, facing disease in the camps. And the American Revolution, while there were very heavy casualties from the battlefield, most of the deaths from the war are still from disease. These soldiers in tight quarters, they are unsanitary conditions. So sometimes they were chained a little too close to drinking water supply. Tight conditions, one person gets sick, everybody gets sick. Not to mention poor hospital conditions. Cold, hunger, disease, many deserting, resigning. Washington wrote to Congress begging for supplies for relief, warning that unless supplies were forthcoming, the Army would either starve or dissolve. Washington barely managed to keep them back together. Basically, it was his leadership, his expertise, his skill. The men knew Washington. They trusted him. They put a good portion of their will to flock to the ends of the earth for him. And because of Washington's leadership, the Army stayed together. 1778 would be very critical. After the British withdrawal from Philadelphia in the spring of 1778, Washington chased after Howe that spring and summer. The Battle of Monmouth Courthouse in June of 1778, in New Jersey, Washington fought the British to a narrow draw. Basically, they decided neither necessarily won nor lost, but the British retreated from their positions, moving further up towards New York City. So in that terms, it was a victory. Washington assumed a position at White Plains as Howe's escaped back into New York City, and afterward the Northern Theater to be a series of only minor skirmishes. Basically, the war is mostly over in the north at this point. American forces basically kind of trying to keep the British ball in New York City. It's kind of a stalemate. I don't really move much either direction, but the Americans basically have won the north. The frontier, though, the west, West Appalachians, is the scene of fierce fighting. Tories and Native Americans fighting the Patriot settlers. Pennsylvania frontier fierce fighting with the Iroquois, essentially destroying what was left of that tribe's power. Kentucky in 1778, Daniel and Boone and 30 men assisted by their wives and children held a raid of 400 Native Americans out of the British at the Battle of Boonesboro. Virginia and the Carolinas, numerous Cherokee villages were destroyed after Cherokee attacks in response. But at this point, the British were trying to cut their losses. Recognized they could get away with losing the New England, that whole area, New York even. But the South had all these rich resources that the British had been looking for a long time. Agricultural resources, cotton, rice, tobacco, huge profits of the British. Particularly the naval stores industry in the Carolinas. So the British are thinking if they could keep all of this, they could still make a lot of money off the southern colonies, and they'd be willing to sacrifice the northern colonies if they could keep the South. So they sent a new British general, General Charles Lord Cornwallis, to the South to basically retake and hold the South for the British. So in November of 1778, Cornwallis takes the city of Savannah, Georgia, very quickly subdues the entire Georgia countryside. By early 1780, he's ready to move against Charleston. The Americans were lucky the first time. The British attempt to take the city by sea failed, but Cornwallis is trying something different. Here, this battle in February 1780, he surprises and overwhelms American Continental forces under General Benjamin Lincoln, capturing 5,500 Continental troops. This is the largest single loss for the Americans during the war, the loss of Charleston. Charleston would be held for the remainder of the war. After the loss of Charleston, basically all of the war in the South disintegrated into chaos. Wild fighting, chaotic fighting, severe reprisals of one side against another. One British colonel, Bannister Tarleton, promising to hang all the rebels once he found them, actually ended up being defeated himself in battle several times, fighting between Tories and Continental and Patriot militias. Well, by the fall of 1780, most of South Carolina was under Cornwallis' control. And Congress decides to send Horatio Gates down to take command of the situation in the South. So he meets with Cornwallis at Kings Mountain, this battle on October 7, 1780. Well, Fort Kings Mountain, Battle of Camden was where Gates met Cornwallis. Camden, South Carolina. this summer of 1780, Camden was a disaster for American forces. Gates overpowered, with heavy casualties, so bad that Gates actually replaced as commander. But a new man was brought in for Kings Mountain. It is Nathaniel Greene. Nathaniel Greene was from Rhode Island. He was a Quaker. Quakers are supposed to be pacifists. People kind of made fun of that, calling Greene the fighting Quaker. Well, Greene, along with General Daniel Morgan and other forces, they meet with they fight Cornwallis at Kings Mountain, and this particular battle here proved to be important. Instead of disaster at Camden under Gates, the draw at Kings Mountain, a near draw, proved that the British could be beaten in the south. If Cornwallis could be beaten, the tide of the war could be turned. So it starts encouraging American forces once again that they could go on the offensive. So Greene divides up his forces with General Morgan, and basically they go all over North Carolina, basically, as Cornwallis tries to push forward, trying to keep the British as off balance as possible. The Battle of Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina. January 1781. Guilford Courthouse, and the Americans take heavy casualties, but they take a lot of British captives and casualties, and essentially keeping the British even further off balance, weakening them further. So Cornwallis is not able to move his plan, go on to the plan moving steadily as a one single force up from South Carolina to North Carolina to Virginia, but instead it's broken up and having to divide his forces even further. He's having to stop, slow down, suppress rebellions wherever he can. In the meantime, though, Benedict Arnold. Arnold was deep in debt and frustrated by his lack of upward mobility. In fact, at one point, he was caught by Washington using Army money to help subsidize his and his wife's lavish lifestyle. Deeply reprimanded by Washington. And from Washington, that's something you're going to remember. So Arnold, humiliated, started looking for a better offer. And the British learned of this. They have spies going back and forth. Washington has spies going back and forth. But the British learned of Arnold's displeasure and started negotiating with him. The main deal that Arnold would defect, kind of general in the British Army, and he would basically sell the fortress at West Point, that's near White Plains, to the British, doing it by basically sending out small groups of reconnaissance detachments more and more and more, until eventually the point that the British would just walk in and take it. In the meantime, though, some of Arnold's officers at West Point, the fortress here, are noticing the strange little character running around back and forth and figure out it's a British spy. A man hanged for spying, and Arnold barely manages to escape, goes to New York, flees into the custody of the British, who commissioned him as a general. At one point, Arnold even discussed kidnapping Washington as part of the negotiations. The whole affair sickened Washington, and Arnold became an example of the worst type of treachery during the war. But Washington didn't have time to worry about this for long. Into 1780, he recognizes the British are coming north, so he sides with the French forces to try to meet the American French forces meeting with the English forces in Virginia. In May 1781, you had the Battle of the Virginia Capes, basically fought in the Chesapeake Bay area. The French army of Admiral de Grasse manages to defeat the English forces which meant now the British, as they're moving forward, they have no navy to support their ground forces. And the French are now patrolling and controlling American waters. Well, Washington meets with, finds the American-French forces at Yorktown. Combined American-French forces 16,000 compared to not quite 10,000 for the British. This is one of the few battles in which Washington actually outnumbers the British. Well, the siege begins at Yorktown on September 28, 1781. Lasted 2 weeks. Middle of October, Cornwallis recognized that he was not going to be able to win the battle. He was not going to be able to turn the tide, and plotted an escape. October 16th, Cornwallis attempted to flee across the York River, hoping to escape from Virginia back into North Carolina, but failed to do so, failed to break the American lines. After this failure, on October 17th, Cornwallis formally sued for peace. He was formally asking for the Americans' terms. Battle, Yorktown campaign, belonged to the Americans. This would be the final major battle of the American Revolution. The second army the British had surrendered to the Americans. After this, the British would be no longer willing to continue a military operation for the Americans. There'll be some sporadic fighting after this one here and there, mostly between Patriot and Tory forces here and there, but this is basically it. So on October 19th, the British and their 8,000 troops formally surrender. British colors are cased in turns, the army band playing from an old nursery rhyme, The World Turned Upside Down. Cornwallis claimed to be too ill to attend. Wrote to superiors, quote, "I have the mortification to inform your excellency that I have been forced to surrender the troops under my command." So he has a second in command hand his sword over to Washington. In these kinds of formal surrender ceremonies like this, the commander of one army gives the sword to the commander of the other army, but Washington, not playing the game, tells Cornwallis' subordinate to hand the sword to Washington's subordinate. This is the last major battle of the American Revolution, Yorktown. The British realized it's hopeless. On February 27, 1782, the British Parliament voted to end military action against America, and on March 5th authorized the Crown to make peace. Lord North resigned on March 20th, and the Marquis of Rockingham, the Prime Minister, begins the negotiations with the Americans as Prime Minister. They died in September, and their next Prime Minister, Lord Shelburne, as Prime Minister, concludes the peace treaty. Peace treaty B, the Treaty of Paris of 1783. Again, different from the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Different treaty, different terms, different years, ending very different wars. Now, out of this treaty, Britain recognizes American independence. With a border in the Mississippi River. And not the Appalachian Mountains, but all the way over the Mississippi River. Ben Franklin, as head of the American delegation, pushed for the annexation of Canada, but the French and Spanish delegations would support it. Southern borders would be with Spain much ambiguous, but the U.S. would gain fishing rights off of Labrador, which was a critical part of the American economy in that region. Labrador, Newfoundland, Gulf of St. Lawrence. Britain convinces the U.S. to press states to return confiscated Loyalist property. It's agrees to do so.
In a lot of cases, loyalists, they had their property seized and sold, often sold to help finance the war effort. And offer no legal impediment to the British merchants with retrieving debts. Honor private debts with the British. Individual debts. And Spain took a lot of territory back, but Britain would cede Florida back to Spain. And they gained Spain from Florida from Spain under the Treaty of Paris 1763. Now they're getting it back. But most of the Spanish settlers living in Spain under Florida under Spanish rule, British rule, didn't want to live under the British, and a lot of them ended up leaving. So Spain is getting back the Florida Panhandle area that is more than populated than it had been before. But essentially, America's southern border now with Spain. Georgia would have become Alabama, Mississippi, but that border is left somewhat ambiguous. So at this point, the treaty is over. American independence has been granted. An expanded nation. It's getting economic rights and privileges. And the U.S. is a weak power, but is a new nation with some little bit of respect in the world. It has the ground to stand on, expand, and build. November 24, 1783, the last British troops left New York City. November 4th, they evacuated Staten Island and Long Island. Washington retired from the Army, went home to Mount Vernon and Martha, and the war was at an end. I look forward to a chapter now as a free and independent nation.